really love the African dance in the park, and I feel it's appropriate for this Sleepy Hollow one-shot. Welcome back, guys, and happy belated Thanksgiving to all of you guys, as well as Black Friday, even though despite the pandemic, I'm not sure how hectic it's gonna be. Anyways, welcome to another Sleepy Hollow one-shot. Um, hold on a sec. Actually, this takes place, um, shoot. This actually takes place during season 2 of Sleepy Hollow, the TV series, and this actually takes place after the events of episode 4, which happens to be not the root of all evil, but back to where I sent thee. And Gavin, my OC, at that time was about to mention that Abby's not the only one who slips through a trance by a musical instrument, but he never had time to explain it because, they were searching for the Pied Piper. Gavin had a rant about Miss Lancaster not reversing the plague, and the mother was willing to sacrifice her kids, which made Gavin furious. So he never had time to explain his personal curse, if you would say. So, you're about to find out here, guys. This is a very interesting story I came up with back at season 2, when I was watching season 2 of Sleepy Hollow. So, let's get this started. Test of Wills. I don't own Sleepy Hollow, it belongs to Fox. However, I'm a huge fan of the series, and this is my first fic for it. I think this was before Dreamscape. I think Dreamscape I mentioned was probably the first, but this is definitely the first before that. So here goes. A few days have passed since their encounter after the Pied Piper. Yet again, Abby was teaching Ichabod how to drive in the precinct's lot. He barely had control over the car as he slammed on the brakes and cursed to himself. How can I handle such a bloody contraption? Abby assured him he was getting slightly better, but he needed to keep in mind he's no longer handling a horse. It's much bigger, more heavier than a horse. Gavin showed up with a huge stack of papers in one hand. Apparently they were printouts, a study guide he made to help Ichabod pass his upcoming exams. 'Cause Ichabod was still learning how to drive. While Abby appreciated his hard work, saying it could help him a lot, she gave him a goldenrod invitation to a reservation at Highland Falls tomorrow at noon. The ride will be a couple hours, so they must leave around 9 a.m. Gavin's face went pale. Abby wondered what was wrong, but Ichabod already knew. Ah, so he did tell someone about his personal curse. On the night after they beat the Pied Piper, Gavin visited his cabin. The novice was still furious over Miss Lancaster's actions, involving the averted sacrifice of her only daughter. Since Abby was a friend of hers, he avoided any contact with her. He recalled saying that Abby wasn't the only one who'd slip into a trance by musical instrument, as I've mentioned, but he never had a chance to explain it, and the Freemason was curious. Since he had the past ties with the Mohawk and the Shawnee, he'd rather talk to him. Gavin hadn't told many people about it, but during early grade school he was on a field trip to a reservation. He and his classmates sat before a ceremony started, but when he heard the drums and chanting, he felt very strange. He began to slip away. His head felt fuzzy, his heart and pulse slowed down, his body became numb, and he just couldn't look away. His eyes and mind were fixed on them. It was as if, like Abby, he was going through some kind of hypnosis. Later, he felt an urge to join them, but he mimicked the drum's rhythm instead. Even as it ended, He still couldn't shake off the so-called thrall he had. "I'm not crazy, am I?" he asked with a shaky voice. After a brief pause, Ichabod said, "Not at all." Gavin couldn't help but wonder why he sunk under. From experience, Crane said the drums have some interesting effects. It's almost like witchcraft. They have their own magic. Whether it be for communication, preparing for battle, or even changing the weather to preserve the crops. Perhaps Gavin was too sensitive of their powers. Then Ichabod wanted to conduct an experiment listening to a recording with a portable tape player and a pair of earphones. Surprisingly, the effects were just like he said. He has been trying a defense mechanism to use the tempo and recite a song that has the same rhythm. However, he never used it. He hoped it'll work this time. Abby suggested to bring his earbuds he used before he faced the piper. Eventually, he accepted. The next day, they were getting ready at the cabin. Gavin brought his iPod with him, so it'd be a good idea to train himself using any speed. They arrived at around 11:20, and Gavin was very nervous. He assured himself he'll be all right as long as his friends are with him. Ichabod actually appreciated the place. Then Gavin heard a steady rhythm in the distance. He started to stray as he unconsciously followed it. Then, realizing what was happening, he hurriedly grabbed the earbuds as he struggled to block the spell, but they slipped out of his hands and landed on the ground. He tried to look in his pockets, but he couldn't find them. Moments later, he succumbed to the trance once more. Crane was impressed of what he'd seen, but Abby noted to him that Gavin disappeared. And if there's like an intro, this is where you would hear it. Although it's not really the series itself, but just a welcoming break here. The closer he got, the deeper the hold. Gavin went to a clearing and numerous teepees were in his sight. As he approached nearer, the drum stopped. One of the tribesmen stood and said they'd been expecting him. Chief Parrish awaited him. They escorted him, and he saw an old man wearing a large headdress with numerous feathers. Gavin bowed down to him, and the chief spoke in a vehement voice that he was glad Gavin could join them. Gavin said he was honored to make his acquaintance. They escorted him, changed him, and put war paint on him. He was now known as the Battlehawk of Darkness, and the trance grew deeper. His first job was to let the witnesses find him. Then he shall strike them, but keep Crane alive, so he could suffer while Abby is being slayed. Or slewed, I should say. Gavin accepted with gratitude. The duo couldn't find Gavin in the area, not even in Abby's van. She wondered where could he have gone. Ichabod insisted he probably heard the drums as he did, all those years ago. He must have followed them to where the village may be. They began their search and found the clearing. Abby noted to Ichabod she found the earbuds Gavin dropped and saw the teepees. The village was empty, but he suggested to look in the chief's tent, which could be in the center, while she looked in the others. It too was barren, and he called Gavin's name a few times. Slowly, Gavin emerged from under a wooden table. He saw his target, and he ran to him while giving out a war cry. At the last moment, Crane turned and braced himself. He recognized him despite the outfit and his menacing eyes. He was wearing black feathers on his shoulders, and some were sticking out of the lower part of his back. He had a blood-coated headband with feathers hanging down from the back and sides. His face was covered in red war paint around his eyes and going down his cheeks, as well as having a hawk emblem on his bare chest. And from the waist down, he was wearing a black shorts and red moccasins. They backed off and Ichabod asked what happened to him. He was suspicious of Chief Parrish and how he took control over Gavin and the Onondagas. He told himself his orders and lunged at him again. Ichabod held him back and assured he would not hurt him. Seconds later, Abby showed up. Even she was shocked as if he were a wolf waiting to attack. He mentioned the second witness, and Crane said he's not himself. Gavin elbowed him as hard as he could. He held his chest in agony as Gavin charged straight toward her. Then she took out her pistol, which made him freeze. But he didn't waver as he said he'll return and make sure the meddling witnesses will meet their downfall. He ran out and disappeared within the brush. Crane hobbled as he held his chest. Abby said as soon as he recovers, they'll find him. He couldn't recall the tribe's enticement could make them act so viciously. He said Henry had complete control over Gavin's and the Ondaga's wills, using them as an army for the apocalypse because he is war after all. Good point. The real chief might still be alive, at least imprisoned somewhere he can't be seen. Dusk fell, and Gavin told Parrish that he failed and couldn't face his enemies alone, at least not with a gun. But he had a better idea, so he rallied up his troops and let them know they mean business. It bought himself some time to make a crimson broth. With the blood of war, they shall remain in his control indefinitely after the full moon reaches its peak. He knows Crane will find Chief Turgado, who's bound against a tree. He looked old, and his messy long hair was hanging in front of his weary hazel eyes. That's right, guys. I made another OC for Sleepy Hollow. Chief Turgado. You'll see what the name means soon enough, as well as the Onondagas. Chief Parrish told Gavin to wait at the village and send the signal so they'll be ready to drink the blood. He confirmed, and Turgado pleaded him not to listen as he was a fake. Parrish tortured and stabbed him in the chest, and he commanded Gavin to go. They found the bush after Crane was able to get back on his feet. The flashlight shone a deerskin sack loaded with various berries and herbs. Crane suggested they must be discreet, as he reminded Abby that they are masters of stealth and detection, much like the Mohawk. They saw footprints, and eventually they saw Turgado imprisoned. Ichabod rescued him as Abby stood watch. The chief opened his eyes and muttered, "Crane?" Ichabod was astonished of how he knew, and Turgado heard from Parrish. Intros were made, and he noticed the sack. They've come to save him and his people. And Gavin. He asked what happened, and Turgado explained. About a day ago, he was returning from a hunt. When he got to the village, he saw his tribe acting strangely. They were like stiffs, hanging on to the man's every word. What was he doing commanding his own clan? They turned on him, and as he ran, they gave chase. Warriors were on the prowl, and even women and children were influenced. He gathered all the ingredients in the sack they found to reverse the mind control spell he laid on them. It'll put them to sleep. But it wasn't long before they found him. He didn't have time to make the broth. In desperation, he tossed the sack aside, and that was where they found it. He must make it before the moon rises to its peak in the sky. Crane! He looked, and Abby was ambushed by a small group. He ran to her, but was struck by a dart in his leg, causing him to fall. Henry approached, and Crane was surrounded. Two red men held him up with his hands bound. Henry ordered them to take them to the village and prepare for the blood of war. Now free, Turgado challenged him to a duel to determine the fate of his people and his friends. Henry accepted. They forced them away as he summoned war. 'Cause back in season 2, they weren't one just yet. It was still his avatar, his ghost. Not his ghost, but his puppet, but you know what I mean, using his telekinesis. Back at the village, a drum was heard emitting from the center tent. They all knew it was Battlehawk. Ichabod and Abby were forced down, and little by little, they joined in unison with him. The moon was climbing higher, and the drums went faster, but Ichabod didn't lose hope. He told her to wait for the signal. The drums were hit harder, and the pace quickened, and the Onondagas were getting riled up. They were each giving a cry to the moon. "Now, Lieutenant!" They managed to knock them out as they were deeply focused on the ritual. They found They found a sack and Ichabod grinded the stuff, while Abby discarded the blood. The ingredients were poured in and the drums stopped. Within seconds they lowered the bowl and hid. Soon Gavin emerged, and the moon shone through the open hole. As Chief Parish decreed, we shall drink the blood of war and forever serve under his wing. We are now his entrusted army for the end of days. For our chieftain and our master Moloch and my brethren, we can all embrace it. Oh. He lowered the bowl and collapsed. They ran to him, and Crane tried to wake him up, but he was out cold. He told Abby to put him somewhere safe while he poured the pole onto the tribe's lips. He needed a weapon and saw arrows within the teepee and poured the broth on their heads before he loaded them up. He knew Turgato would lose. He must stop his son before it's too late. Abby laid Gavin in the back seat of her van and buckled him. Ichabod, take care of Ichabod. She promised she would before she locked it. Just as Wur was making his last cut on a wounded Turgato, a dart flew into his neck. Henry felt it too, like a bug bite. Then Crane blew again toward its leg. Henry saw his assailant for a second, then he blacked out and Wur dissipated. They function as one entity, after all, so one affects the other. Turgato thanked him for the save, then Abby appeared. He assured it's over, at least for now. They went to the village and the Onondagas came too as their normal selves. In fact, they could barely recall what occurred. Turgato introduced the witnesses to them and they stated what transpired. The Onondagas were very pleased. Then he asked where the kid was. Abby told him he's safe. He saw them as something more, and they discussed about the war and their mission inside the tent where a bonfire was ablaze. He had a vision of demons, but he didn't think it'd be too close to home. I always thought the end of the world is a crazy horse's fate farce. But if what you are saying is true, our time is short. He said he'll help them in any way he can, and he invited them, it should be invited, them tomorrow at the reservation. They could take the kid with them if he's willing. They would be delighted, but Turgato had a special surprise for Crane. During the ride back, Abby wondered where Gavin should sleep. He volunteered to let him stay at his place for the night. He laid Gavin out on his bed, wished him good night, and eventually he slept soundly after changing him. By the next morning, Gavin slowly woke up. Ichabod was watching over him as he began to stir. Ichabod. When his head cleared, he asked if Abby was all right. Ichabod said she's fine and she'll be on her way here after she got breakfast. Then he asked if he remembered anything. Gavin hesitated. Then in a groggy voice he said he was at the reservation with them. Then minutes later, he heard drums far away. He looked and almost instantaneously followed them. He became mesmerized by the rhythm and tried and failed to fight it. Finally, he came to a group of teepees and saw the Onondagas and the chief. He remembered little after that. His throat tightened as he said, "Whatever he has done, he's sorry." "No, Gavin, it wasn't your fault. It was my son who had control over you." Wide-eyed Gavin was shocked. "What? He was behind all this? Why would he use me?" Ichabod mentioned his goal of creating an army for the apocalypse, and somehow he knew where he stood. He is the horseman of war, after all, and he has the ability to read a person's sins. But he shouldn't worry anymore, now that his plans were foiled again. Abby appeared, and this time Gavin wasn't nervous and he'll no longer be under Henry's spell. Turgato met them, and he gave Gavin a blood-red headband with a hawk in the center and two pairs of axes crossing on each side. Abby got a special patch for her. and another for Jenny. They must keep the charms close to their hearts to protect them from evil spirits. They also had new aliases. Gavin was Battlehawk of Light, Abby was Ruby Wolf, and Jenny was Maple Fox. And as for Soren Crane, Chief Tragato led him to his tent while Gavin and Abby found seats near the stage. All kinds of drums were set in a circle. The stage was covered with ashikos, crowdy-crons, dovels, dalkies, or dalks actually, and djembes. I don't know if I'm saying those right. Inside, he was being decorated and dressed up. He had a large headdress with black and white feathers protruding from it, a beak-shaped covering for his nose, moccasins, and war paint. He's a full-fledged member, and he'll be a part of the presentation. They later saw him at the back of the ring. When the dance started, Gavin put in his earbuds, and watching the rhythm, he recited the catalyst to himself. Meanwhile, Henry awakened and planned his next move. So that's how all that happened, in case you're wondering. The story was based off from an event from my childhood. No joke. Even I can't remember that event. There was this field trip, and I did slip into a trance of sorts. I mean, I can't help it. Even when I listened to the Sesame Street clips, for instance, and if the drums were so intense, the exotic drums, I would always have that same feeling. I mean, I don't regret it though. Sometimes it feels good, kind of. So, yeah, there's that. Tragato is a mashup with Turgle, meaning great chief, and Cato, meaning prudence, and together is great chief of prudence. Soren Crane represents Ichabod's namesake, as well as his constant rise through his ranks as a soldier and his limitless valuable experience. I thought Ruby Wolf for Abby was accurate, because she may be beautiful like a ruby, but just as sharp in looks, personality, and her skills. Also, she works well at night like an officer. She's strong and independent, and she could either work alone or in a group with efficiency. Gavin does mean Battlehawk, and Lucas means light. And for Jenny, Maple Fox was a nice touch. She's cunning in a good way, and Maple could be an inspiration from her actress's Canadian roots, as well as her name Greenwood. I can't believe it, she actually made a cameo in one Ridiculousness episode, which is good, considering I don't like the show anyway. So it was nice. The Onondagas are a tribe from New York, and I thought a destination like Highland Falls would be a decent location. Or Basin Falls. I got two names for that. What do you think about this fic? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, see ya, sleepyheads. Until then, this is the Ecron Writer signing out. And before I go, these drums really inspired me to make some sort of annual event. This one, the tribal ceremony. And yes, this was roughly inspired by my own experiences, my past experiences and the randomness it had while I was being affected by it. So I'll see you next time, sleepyheads.